If you've spent any time near the Appalachian Mountains, you get it. The stories out here don't just come from imagination, they get passed down, remembered, felt. I'm curious, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. It always blows my mind how many of us are out there, scattered across the country, all sharing the same eerie tale in the dark. And if you're enjoying this, tap that like button and subscribe. It helps others find their way into these woods, even if they don't realize what's waiting. Let's start. I wasn't supposed to take that path. The gas station clerk even said, locals don't go past Red Creek after dark. But I was running out of daylight, out of options, and worst of all, out of cell service. I figured I'd shave 40 minutes off my drive through a narrow backwoods road that snaked through the mountains. I had no idea I was driving into a place where people vanish without a sound, where the woods don't just feel wrong, they are. This happened in September 2022, during a solo road trip I took through Appalachia. My name's Rick Mercer, I'm 32, work freelance as a landscape photographer, and at the time, I was on assignment for a travel site trying to map under-the-radar hiking trails and backcountry roads. I'd been doing this kind of work for years, sleeping in my car, chasing sunrises, roughing it in the wilderness. I thought I knew how to handle myself out there. I was cutting across southern West Virginia after shooting some fog-heavy morning shots near Green Bank. My plan was to get to a motel in Grundy, Virginia, before sundown. Somewhere near Fayette County, I took a wrong exit, an unmarked gravel fork that didn't appear on Google Maps. I was low on gas, low on patience, and when the signal cut out, I figured I'd either find the main highway again, or an old-timer who could point me in the right direction. I got neither. It started with a dull sense of unease. Not fear, not yet, but that kind of gut-feeling discomfort you can't explain. The gravel road was narrower than I expected, one side climbing into thick woods, and the other falling away into a rocky slope. The trees arched overhead like they were closing in. I slowed down, rolled my window halfway down just to get some air. That's when I realized I hadn't seen another vehicle for nearly 45 minutes. No cabins, no mailbox, not even tire tracks. A faded sign flashed by, too fast to read, but I caught part of it. No maint, and beyond this point. I should have turned around, but I was too deep into backtrack without risking running out of gas, and pride is a dangerous thing when you're alone. I pressed on. Around 6:15 p.m., the sun started to dip behind the trees. The shadows went from long to thick. I came around a bend and spotted something strange, a rusted-out pickup, deep in the brush, door flung open, ivy growing through the cab like it had been there for years. I slowed, squinting, but saw no movement. Then something else, scattered cans, a boot, and a crushed old toolbox in the weeds. It looked like someone had driven off the road on purpose. I drove on, but the tension in my chest was growing. The road narrowed again until it was barely the width of my car. At 6:32 p.m., I made the mistake of pulling over to check my map. I'd printed one as backup, but when I stepped out to look at it on the hood, the forest hit me with a soundless kind of pressure. Not silent, just wrong. No birds. No crickets. Just the soft crackle of wind through dying leaves. I got back in, closed the door, and that's when I noticed it. There were drag marks on the gravel, wide, shallow grooves, like something heavy had been pulled across the road. They started at the tree lean and ended under my car. I opened the door, stepped out again, bent down, and that's when I heard the branches shift behind me. Not wind. Steps. I spun around. Nothing. I held my breath. Still nothing. I backed toward the car slowly, scanning the woods, every instinct screaming to get out of there. The instant I shut the door, something slammed into the back bumper. I shot forward in panic, tires spitting gravel. Through the rearview mirror, I caught a blur of movement, a figure darting back into the woods. Human height. Barefoot. Shirtless. Fast. I floored it. For the next 10 minutes, the road twisted like it wanted to trap me. Hairpin turns, blind corners, sudden dips. The forest closed in tighter with every mile. At 6:48 p.m., I saw a handmade sign nailed to a tree. leave. Just that. One word. Big black paint. That was the last thing I remember seeing before the road just ended. A dirt wall blocked my way, like someone had deliberately bulldozed a mound across the road. I braked hard. Dust clouded the windshield. I sat frozen for a second, engine idling, trying to piece together what just happened. Behind me, I could hear something moving in the trees. Snapping twigs. Breathing, maybe. I couldn't reverse fast enough. And that's when the headlights flickered out. I was plunged into blackness, so total I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I slammed my fists on the dash, turned the key, nothing. Engine dead. Battery gone. No power. The forest outside was utterly still, but not calm, predatory. I locked the doors out of instinct. My phone. Still no signal, still useless. Then tap, tap. I whipped my head toward the passenger side window. Something was out there. I strained to see, eyes adjusting, breath shallow. The tapping came again, like knuckles on glass, light and deliberate. And then I saw it. A face. Inches from the window. But wrong. It was a man, or had been once. Long matted hair, skin dark with dirt or rot, lips peeled back into a slack smile. But what stopped me cold was his eyes. They weren't curious. They weren't angry. They were empty. Like he wasn't looking at me, just through me. He pressed his forehead to the glass and exhaled, fogging up the window with a slow breath that smelled like blood and iron. I didn't think. I acted. I kicked my door open, bolted into the dark with only my keys and flashlight. I ran uphill, through bramble rocks, whatever I could manage. Behind me, I heard him shout once, like a gurgled howl, and something else answered. More than one. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to stay off the road. I ran for what felt like hours, legs burning, throat dry. Every so often, I'd hear rustling close behind, always catching up. I didn't stop until I found a cluster of boulders and wedged myself between them, hidden beneath a tangle of roots and dead leaves. I stayed there all night. When daylight broke, I crawled out of that hiding spot, covered in dirt and cold sweat. The forest didn't look any less menacing, but at least I could see. I followed the slope downward, bruised and limping, until I heard a distant humming, power lines. By mid-morning, I reached a small ranger station. The officer there, older guy named Welch, barely reacted when I told him where I'd been. He just shook his head, handed me water, and said, "Ain't the first time someone wandered into those hills. You're lucky you made it out on foot." When I asked if others had disappeared back there, he just nodded once and said, "We don't go past the Red Creek line anymore. Nobody does." He made a call, got a tow for my car, and told me to stay on the main roads from now on. They found my SUV 2 days later, 20 miles from where I thought I left it. The inside had been stripped, glove box torn open, rearview mirror ripped off, deep claw-like scrapes on the passenger seat. But no blood, no signs of animals, and worst of all, no footprints. Not even mine. I filed a report, stayed one more night at a nearby lodge, and then left West Virginia for good. I've never gone back. Every now and then, I still dream about that face in the window. Not the look of it, but the lack of it. The way it smiled without recognition. The way it didn't care who I was. Just that I was there. And I shouldn't have been. There's a part of the Appalachian woods where the trails just stop showing up on maps. Where even the trees seem older, twisted wrong like they've been watching too long. I found that place by accident last fall while chasing a story, thinking I could handle whatever was out there. But those woods didn't want me to leave. And what I saw, I still don't know if I ever truly did make it out. My name's Jeremy Sloan. I'm 29, a freelance journalist from Asheville, North Carolina. I mostly cover local history, Appalachian folklore, off-the-grid communities, stuff that blurs the line between culture and urban legend. I've hiked more backcountry trails than I can count, and spent nights in cabins, so deep you forget there's a world with Wi-Fi and sirens and streetlights. I thought I was used to the dark, to silence, to the unknown. But nothing prepared me for what I stumbled into last October. I was chasing a lead for a long-form piece on vanishing hollers, remote areas in the Appalachian range where people have reportedly gone missing, but no official cases were ever filed. It was one of those local rumors whispered in truck stops and bait shops, the kind old-timers would shrug off but never deny. My contact was a retired park ranger named Bill Crenshaw. He told me about a forgotten trail up near the North Carolina-Tennessee border, where a few hikers and a pair of off-grid squatters had gone quiet over the last 2 decades. Bill said if I wanted a story, that'd be the place. I packed light, brought my camera, a field recorder, and enough gear to spend one night alone. The trailhead was barely marked, a rotting wood post half swallowed by moss, no signs, no ranger tape, no warnings. Just a narrow dirt path that sloped into thick hardwood forest. I set off early, hoping to reach an old shelter marked on Bill's map by late afternoon. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, not peaceful quiet, but that heavy, unnatural stillness. I kept checking behind me, even though I was sure I was alone. By noon, the sun had vanished behind cloud cover, and everything turned this washed-out gray. The trees were dense, black-barked, like they'd been burned long ago but never died. I found crude markers in the dirt, arranged sticks, old bottle caps nailed to trees. Not random. Deliberate. I thought maybe a local hermit was still living out there. But the deeper I got, the stranger it felt. Around 2 p.m., I reached a clearing. It should have been a relief, open space, a good spot to rest, but it wasn't. The clearing was perfectly circular. No underbrush. No animals. Just dry, brittle grass and a fire ring filled with bone fragments. Not deer bones. Smaller. Cleaner. Arranged in a pattern. I took a few pictures, but my hands were shaking. Then I heard it. A single knock. Not a tree falling or a branch breaking. One sharp, deliberate knock. I spun around, expecting to see someone. Nothing. I called out. No answer. I stepped backward, slow, trying to scan the woods without making sudden movements. Another knock, closer this time. Still no one there. I picked up my bag, turned toward the trail, and froze. There were no more footprints behind me. The dirt I'd kicked up was gone. The leaves I crushed earlier had rearranged. It was like the woods had erased me. I panicked. I turned and walked faster, then ran. The trail was wrong. Twisting. Forking into paths I didn't take. Trees that looked familiar started repeating. I tried using my compass, but it spun uselessly in place. My phone was already dead. Cold battery, even though I'd charged it that morning. I saw a figure at 3:47 p.m. exactly that time. I remember because I checked my watch in disbelief. He was standing just ahead, down the slope, tall, pale, wearing clothes too old for this century. He didn't move. Didn't gesture. Just stared. I waved. Nothing. I called out. He turned mechanically slow and walked away, deeper into the trees. I didn't follow. Instead, I turned and hiked hard in the opposite direction until my legs burned. It got darker fast, like dusk had fallen all at once. I knew I wouldn't make it out before night. That's when I spotted the cabin, half buried into the hillside. No windows. One crooked door hanging half open. And smoke, thin, gray smoke, curling from the metal chimney pipe. I didn't want to enter, but the cold had already set in, and night in the Appalachians without shelter is a death sentence. I knocked. No answer. I stepped inside. It smelled like earth and rusted metal. The floor was dirt, the walls were lined with broken furniture, plastic tarps, and rotted animal hides. But what caught my eye were the jars, dozens of them, lining a shelf. Each filled with what looked like hair. Human hair. Blonde, brown, black. Some curled at the bottom like they'd been submerged for years. I turned to leave, and saw the face in the corner. He hadn't made a sound. Just sat there on a low stool, half covered in blankets. A man, maybe 60s, face so thin you could see every tendon twitch beneath his skin. His lips were sewn shut. Literally sewn. Crude thread. He pointed to the ceiling with one shaking hand. I followed his gesture. Names. Hundreds of them. Carved into the ceiling beams. In perfect block letters. Some fresh. Some faded. My own name was among them. Jeremy Sloan. Scratched shallow into the beam above my head. still bleeding sap. I turned back to ask him what this was, but he was gone. Not vanished, gone like he'd never been there. No stool. No blankets. Just an empty corner. That was the last thing I remember from inside. When I came to, I was outside. It was daylight again. I was lying in a patch of wet moss, no cabin in sight. My backpack was gone. My camera and field recorder, gone. Just my wallet, my watch, and a ripped corner of my printed trail map in my back pocket. And scratched into my forearm, shallow but deliberate, stay gone. I stumbled down the ridge until I found a dirt road with logging tire tracks. A pickup passed not 30 minutes later, and the guy, some local farmer, said he'd take me into town. I asked if he knew about an old shelter or cabin near the state line. He looked uneasy, then said quietly, "You didn't go near Pine Run, did you?" I nodded. He didn't speak again the rest of the drive. I didn't tell anyone the full story. Who'd believe it? I told Bill I got turned around and lost my gear in the dark. He just nodded slowly and said, "It's a good thing you came back before the second night. Most don't." 2 months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. No postmark. Inside was my field recorder. Dead batteries, but when I replaced them and played the last file, my hands went cold. It was me, my voice, breathing hard, whispering, clearly terrified. Then a pause. Then another voice. Not mine. It said, "He's close. Just keep him walking." Then a knock. And then the file cut off. I keep the recorder locked in a drawer now. Haven't gone hiking since. Haven't touched another story. I still don't know how my name ended up in that cabin. I don't know how I made it out. But some nights, I wake up and swear I hear that knock, 3 slow taps, on the wall outside my window. And I don't check. I never check. I've hitchhiked through deserts, crashed in gas station parking lots, and even spent a night in an abandoned train yard. But nothing ever got to me like that trip through Appalachia. I thought I was just passing through some quiet backwoods town in eastern Kentucky. I didn't know I was walking straight into a place that didn't want strangers, especially ones asking questions. What I saw there still messes with my head. But what those people said, that's what really keeps me up. My name's Caleb Warner. I was 26 when this happened, back in October 2021. I'd taken a break from a tech job in Louisville to travel light. Just me, a backpack, and a cheap DSLR. My goal was to make a short docu-series on forgotten towns in Appalachia, communities cut off from the grid, where the post office shut down decades ago, and everyone either moved out or buried deep. I wasn't after ghost stories. I was after real people, real history. I thought a place called Arliss might be a good one to end the series on. I found it marked faintly on an old printed atlas at a flea market, Arliss, Kentucky. Population? Unknown. No photos online. No Google reviews. Just a faded blip about a coal operation closing there in the 80s. I figured I'd hike into town from a county road, talk to a few locals, and shoot some B-roll of what was left. That was the plan. What I found instead was a town stuck in its own timeline, and people who didn't seem entirely convinced I should leave. I set off just after 11 a.m. from the closest paved road I could reach by rideshare, Route 215, a good 12 miles from Arliss. I followed a gravel track up into the hills, my boots crunching loose shale and frost-dusted leaves. The trees were thinning for fall, their bare branches clawing up toward a cloudy sky. I passed rusted fence posts, sagging barns, and what looked like a derailed mining cart, half buried in the earth. Around 1:30 p.m., I crossed a narrow footbridge into Arliss. The town was too intact. Not abandoned, not exactly alive either. There were houses, weathered and worn, yes, but with clotheslines strung between them, smoke curling from a few chimneys. I expected silence, but heard the faint hum of an engine somewhere, a dog barking distantly, even wind chimes clinking from an old porch. I figured I'd find someone to talk to at what looked like a general store near the town's center. Its sign read Marley's Goods in hand-painted letters. When I opened the door, a bell chimed, and every conversation inside stopped. For men, and one older woman turned and stared. Hard. No smiles. No nods. Just blank, direct stares like I'd walked into someone else's home without knocking. I smiled, awkward. Hey, I'm doing a little documentary thing on rural towns. Just looking to talk to folks about life out here. The woman behind the counter tilted her head. Why? Just curious, I said. It's a dying way of life in some places, and I want to capture it before it disappears. She stared for a beat, then turned her eyes toward one of the men. He stepped forward. Dirty overalls, cracked boots, eyes too sharp for his age. Ain't nothing dying here. Just parts that don't need outsiders. I laughed nervously, trying to ease the tension. I didn't mean any offense. Just thought maybe someone would be open to talking. Another man said quietly, "Best keep walking if you want to stay welcome." I left, muttering an apology, and walked back out onto the street. The cold was setting in now, real mountain cold, the kind that cuts through your jacket. I figured I'd take a few photos of the surroundings, and then start heading back. But when I looked around, things had shifted. The dog that had barked earlier was now sitting in the road, watching me. Still. Silent. No collar. There were fewer noises, no wind chimes, no distant hum. Just the quiet shuffle of someone behind a curtain as I passed a window. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Thick wire mesh behind screen doors, gas cans stacked beside porches, piles of chopped wood that looked more like barricades than supplies. I tried retracing my path to the bridge. It wasn't there. I walked the road twice, 3 times, and where the footbridge had crossed the creek, there was nothing but cold, rushing water and steep embankments. No trail, no boards, just leaves and stone, like it had never been there. Panic crept up fast. I turned, heading back toward the store to ask for help, but the lights were off now. Curtains drawn. A closed sign I hadn't seen before hung in the window. That's when I heard footsteps. Not one person, many. I turned toward the sound. 7 people. All men. All walking in a slow line down the road toward me. Same blank expressions. Not angry. Not smiling. Just watching me like they were waiting for something to click into place. I backed away and ducked between 2 houses, hoping to cut through to the other side of town. But everywhere I turned, someone was there. Standing on a porch. Sitting on a stump. Watching. One old man leaned out and spat without breaking eye contact. I ran. Through backyards. Past rusted cars and chicken wire and broken rocking chairs. I cut through a garden filled with root vegetables and nearly tripped over a rope snare stretched between 2 posts. I kept running faster, heart thudding in my ears. I found an old church at the far end of town. Doors chained shut, windows boarded. I tried prying open the side entrance. It gave just barely, and I slipped inside. Dark, dusty, smelled like mold and burnt paper. Then I heard it, chanting. Muffled, rhythmic, coming from underneath. A trapdoor in the floor was cracked open. A faint orange light glowed beneath it. I stepped forward, knees shaking, but before I could get closer, I heard the front doors creak open. Bootsteps on rotted wood. 2, 3, for people entering. No talking, just footsteps. I slipped behind the pulpit, crawled into the shadows, and held my breath. They stayed for hours, just pacing, waiting. At some point, I passed out. When I came to, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through a hole in the roof, and the church was empty again. No sign of the people. No sound. I bolted out and followed the slope behind the church, climbing until I found a ridge. And there it was. The creek. The bridge. Just like before. I didn't ask questions. I just ran. I didn't stop until I reached Route 215 again, where a pickup finally pulled over and gave me a ride to the next town. I didn't tell the driver anything. I couldn't. When I got home, I checked every map I could find, physical, digital, archived. No trace of Arliss. Gone. I checked the location data on my DSLR. The folder was still there, but every image was corrupted. Just static and color bleed. I tried recovering them. Nothing worked. A week later, I found something else. In the bottom of my backpack was a folded slip of paper. One sentence, handwritten. We ain't forgotten. We just ain't ready to be remembered. That was it. I've tried to forget it. To believe I just got turned around, hallucinated something from exhaustion, maybe ate something bad. But then I see them. Sometimes in the corner of my eye. A man with cracked boots standing by a stop sign. A woman behind the counter at a rural gas station who won't break eye contact. Always quiet, always staring, like they're just making sure I kept my promise. I never uploaded that documentary, and I never went looking for Arliss again. My name's Tyler Langston. I was 31 when this happened, back in October 2020. I'd been burned out after a rough breakup and a brutal quarter at work, so when my cousin offered me his old Subaru for the weekend, I jumped at the chance to get away. My plan was simple: drive the Blue Ridge Parkway from Asheville to Roanoke, take photos, sleep in the back seat, and clear my head. I'd done plenty of solo trips before, camping in the Smokies, hiking off-grid near Shenandoah, so this wasn't supposed to be anything new or risky. I set out on a Friday morning, sky bright and crisp, coffee in hand. By noon, I'd already pulled over 3 times to take photos of the turning leaves and low-rolling fog hugging the hillsides. Around 3:45 p.m., somewhere near Allegheny County, I noticed the road was narrowing, less shoulder, more cracked pavement, and a creeping sense that I hadn't passed another car in at least 30 minutes. Still, I wasn't worried. The sun was high, and I figured I'd make camp by a lookout point before it dipped too low. That was before the engine stuttered, twice, and the dashboard lights all flared red. I pulled over to the side, engine wheezing like it had run out of breath. I popped the hood, even though I had no idea what I was looking at. Steam hissed out from the radiator. The belts looked fine, no visible leaks, but something deeper was off, like the whole car had just decided to give up. My phone had no bars. Of course. I stood on the roof for a second, waving it around like an idiot, hoping for one flicker of signal. Nothing. No traffic. No hikers. Just trees so thick they swallowed sound. It was the quiet that got me first, not peaceful but heavy. Like everything had stopped watching for a moment and started listening. I figured I'd walk. I marked my location on the map I'd stuffed in my glove box, grabbed my water bottle, and started down the road. I hadn't gone a full half-mile when I heard it, crunching leaves. Behind me. Slow. Deliberate. I stopped, turned. Nothing there. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" Silence. I waited, then kept walking. The sound picked up again. This time closer. I spun around, caught something move, a flash of fabric between the trees. Brownish green. Maybe a coat. Maybe camo. I shouted louder. Still nothing. I picked up the pace. The air was getting colder. The sky was fading orange and pink through the bare branches. That's when I saw the cabin. It was tucked off the main road, just barely visible through a dip in the forest. Weathered wood, sagging roof, stone chimney. A single light glowed faintly in one window. My gut told me to keep walking. But my feet, cold, sore, and desperate, told me otherwise. I knocked. No answer. I tried again. "Hello. Sorry to bother you." My car broke down. The door creaked open on its own. Just a few inches. I stepped inside slowly, calling out again. "Anyone home?" The inside smelled of damp wood and kerosene. A small fire burned in the hearth. On a nearby table, a loaf of bread sat half-sliced. Still warm. A cup of tea steamed gently beside it. That's when the man walked in. Not through the door. From the back room. Tall, pale, bearded. Mid-60s maybe. Dressed in layered wool like he belonged to another decade. He didn't speak, just looked me up and down and said, "You shouldn't be out here after dusk." I apologized, explained everything in a rush. He just nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "You'll stay the night," he said. "Phones don't work up here. I'll walk you to town in the morning." I hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded once. "Better in here than out there." I didn't sleep much that night. Something felt off. He never introduced himself. He didn't ask my name. But when I woke in the middle of the night, I saw something scratched into the wooden beam above the fireplace. "Tyler Langston, stay still." I sat up in the darkness, heart pounding, staring at the carving. It hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. The name was etched fresh, with fibers still curled at the edge. And those last two words, "Stay still," like a command, not advice. I glanced around. The fire was nearly out, but the house was warm. Too warm. I turned to check on the man. Maybe he'd done it. Maybe it was some weird joke. But he wasn't in the cot anymore. His blanket was folded neatly. No sound from the other rooms. I got up, crept toward the front door, and stepped outside. The woods were pitch black but filled with sound, snapping twigs, crunching footsteps, low voices that didn't quite form words. I saw a figure out by the treeline, then another, and another, all standing still, watching. They weren't calling for help. They weren't approaching. They were just there. Then I heard a whisper right behind me. Back inside. I turned, no one. But the door was now shut behind me, though I hadn't touched it. And the carving above the fire now had a second name added. Stephen Gray ran. I left before dawn, before the man came back, or whatever version of him lived in that place. I took the side door, walked fast and quiet back to the road, and didn't stop until I saw my car again. Hood still up, steam long since gone. When I got in, it started without issue. No stutter. No lights. Engine smooth as ever. Signal returned half a mile down the road. I drove until I hit a small ranger outpost just past the Virginia line. I told them my car had overheated and I'd stayed with a stranger in the woods. The ranger, young guy, name tag said Myers, gave me a weird look when I mentioned the cabin near Allegheny County. "You mean old Ellery's place?" he asked. "Maybe." Bearded guy. Lived alone. He shook his head. "Ellery's been dead 10 years. Fire took the whole cabin in 2012. Nothing but stone foundation left now." I went cold. "No. I was in that cabin." He frowned, leaned back in his chair. "Then you got lucky." I left. Never looked back. 2 weeks later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a torn piece of wood. Carved into it, rough but clear. "You stayed." And nothing else. I threw it out. Burned it, actually. But sometimes I swear I can smell that same damp wood and kerosene when I'm falling asleep. And I still wonder, what would have happened if I'd run? If I'd said no to that man? Or if I'd ever turned around in those woods? Because I think they knew I was coming. And I think they're still watching to see if I ever go back. I thought it'd be just another detour, just another forgotten Appalachian town tucked into a hollow off the main trail. The kind of place you pass through, snap a few photos of, and leave behind. But the day my truck broke down in that coal town, something felt off from the start. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way the people looked at me, like I'd already been there before. Like they'd been waiting. My name's Mark Ellison. I'm 35, a freelance writer from Knoxville, Tennessee. I've spent the better part of the last decade hiking stretches of the Appalachian Trail and writing small human interest pieces, profiles of towns that faded after the mines closed, interviews with the last families who stuck around. It's quiet work. No fame, no thrill, just me, a notebook, a camera, and a love for these mountains. I know Appalachia better than most. I know what's normal out here and what isn't. This happened in September of 2022. I was headed toward a section of the trail that cuts near the Virginia-Kentucky border, trying to follow up on a story from an old miner's widow about a coal town called Ashford Hollow. Not much came up on Google, just a blip in mining history books and one old photo on a blog, a collapsing building with the words Ashford General half visible on the side. I figured I'd drive into town, talk to whoever was left, and hike out the next morning. It didn't go like that. The town didn't appear on any GPS apps. I had to use a printed map from a 1989 trail guide, tracing an old mining road off a rural highway. The drive was quiet, long, and winding. No signs, no cars, just dense pine climbing on both sides of a dirt road that narrowed the deeper I got. After an hour, the terrain dipped and opened into a bowl-shaped hollow. That's when I saw the first house, then a dozen more. Old, clapboard buildings blackened with age and coal dust, like they hadn't seen paint in 50 years. I rolled through slow. The road turned to gravel, then finally gave out near what looked like the town's center, a boarded-up post office, a sagging church, and an old general store with no windows. The town didn't look abandoned, just stuck. There were clothes on lines, smoke drifting from one chimney. A pickup truck parked crooked outside a house. That's when my engine sputtered. I tapped the gas. Nothing. The truck wheezed, lights flickered, and then it died. Just like that. I sat there for a second in disbelief, then got out, popped the hood, and stared at the engine like I knew what I was doing. The heat had dropped fast. It was maybe 4:30 p.m., but the hollow already felt like evening. Shadows stretched long and thin over the cracked pavement. That's when I noticed someone watching me. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, standing barefoot behind the post office. She didn't move, didn't smile, just stared. A few seconds later, she ducked back behind the building without a sound. I looked around and realized there were more eyes on me, faces behind curtains, dark silhouettes in doorways. I called out, "Hey, my truck died. Is there anyone who can help?" No one answered, just wind and the distant sound of a screen door creaking somewhere. Finally, a man stepped out from the general store, late 50s, maybe older, rail-thin, with skin stained deep with coal dust or grease. He wore coveralls and had a deep Appalachian drawl. "You ain't supposed to be here," he said flatly. I introduced myself, explained I was a writer, told him I was looking into the history of Ashford Hollow. He didn't blink. "Ain't nothing here for you, mister. Ain't nothing here at all." I asked about a phone. He just shook his head. "Line's been dead for years." I asked if there was somewhere I could stay until morning. He paused, then said, "You can sleep in the church. Ain't been used in a while, but you leave come daylight." Something in his voice made me nod without arguing. He handed me a rusty key. "Don't go knocking nowhere else. Folks don't take kindly to surprise." The church was one room, pews rotted, altar splintered, stained glass long gone. I set my sleeping bag near the door and tried to journal a bit, but my hands were shaking. Something didn't sit right. This town, it felt wrong. Not haunted, not cursed, just closed like a wound that hadn't healed. Around midnight, I heard singing. Low, fragile, from outside. I crept to the window and saw a group of townsfolk standing in a circle near the old mine entrance, holding lanterns. Men, women, even children, singing a tune I didn't recognize. It was eerie, no instruments, no rhythm, just a mournful hum that rose and fell like wind through dead trees. They took turns stepping forward. One by one, they dropped something into a pit near the entrance, bundles wrapped in cloth, small boxes, even what looked like a photograph. Then I heard my name, clear as day from one of the voices, whispered but close. "Mark Ellison." I spun around. No one in the church. But the door had opened, quietly on its own. I rushed out, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in my hand. The group was gone. The lanterns, the people, everything. Not even footprints in the dirt. Just me, and a box left near the pit. I lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a photograph. Of me. Taken from behind, wearing the exact same jacket I had on. Me, standing at the edge of town. It had been taken that afternoon. Scrawled across the photo's bottom edge in shaky handwriting. "You stayed too long." I ran. Back to the church. Grabbed my pack. Didn't even roll up the sleeping bag. I hiked out of Ashford Hollow by moonlight, retracing the road as best I could. After a couple hours, I heard an engine. Headlights. A Ranger truck. I flagged it down like my life depended on it. The guy inside was young, clean-shaven, confused. "You just come out of there?" he asked, pointing toward the hollow. I nodded, breathless. He shook his head. "That town's been sealed since 2003. Mine collapse buried half of it. Nobody lives there anymore." I tried to argue, tried to tell him what I saw. He looked disturbed but calm. "You sure you weren't at Fogarty's mill? That place still has some folks." I shook my head. "No. Ashford Hollow. It had houses. People. A man at the general store." The ranger hesitated, then said something that stuck with me. "They buried 22 people in that collapse. They only recovered 15. Back in Knoxville, I tried to find my photos. My phone was dead, fried somehow. The SD card in my camera had one file left, a blurry, overexposed image. I could barely make out the church pews. But on the very edge of the frame, there was someone standing behind me. Barefoot. Girl. Staring straight at the lens. I know what I saw. I know I was there. And I know that Hollow didn't want to be remembered. They let me leave because I left. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone back the next morning like I planned. If I'd knocked on the wrong door. If I'd stayed one more hour. I haven't hiked alone since. And every time I pass through the Blue Ridge, I swear I see a figure by the tree line. Watching. Waiting. My car died on a winding stretch of Highway 441, just as the sun dipped behind the Smoky Mountains. 1 minute I was blasting music and sipping gas station coffee. The next I was stranded with no cell signal and a dead engine. What started as a scenic solo road trip turned into the most nerve-wracking night of my life. I thought I'd be fine waiting for sunrise. I was wrong, so wrong. This happened last fall, sometime in early October. I was driving alone from Asheville, North Carolina to Gatlinburg, Tennessee to meet an old friend for a hiking weekend. The drive through the Smokies is supposed to be beautiful. Golden leaves, crisp mountain air, maybe even some elk sightings if you're lucky. I'd timed the trip, so I'd hit the overlook points during golden hour. That was the plan, at least. The trouble started somewhere near Newfound Gap Road. I hadn't passed another car in over 20 minutes. My rental car, a beat-up 2012 Honda Civic, began to sputter and jerk like it couldn't breathe right. Then it just died completely, like someone yanked the plug. I coasted to the side of the road, right where the trees thickened and the mist started to crawl down the mountain like fingers. There was no mile marker, no visible shoulder, and no bars of reception. I was deep in the park, surrounded by silence. I sat in the car for a while, expecting it to magically turn back on after a few deep breaths and a curse or two. Nothing. I checked the flashlight in my glove box, threw on a hoodie, and stepped out to pop the hood, hoping it was something stupid like a loose battery cable. The second I stepped outside, I realized how isolated I truly was. The forest had gone unnaturally still. Even the breeze seemed to pause, like the trees were holding their breath. Under the hood looked fine, at least to my untrained eyes. I gave up, locked the car, and decided I'd walk back in the direction I'd come from. It wasn't ideal, but it felt better than standing still. I figured I'd eventually hit a ranger outpost or a turnout where I could flag someone down. The air got colder quickly, and the further I walked, the heavier the silence became. Not just quiet, silent. No birds, no bugs, not even the rustling of squirrels or wind in the trees. About 20 minutes into the walk, I saw something off. To my right, deep in the woods, maybe 60 yards in, there was a light. A soft orange glow, like from an oil lantern or a small campfire. It didn't flicker the way a campfire would, though. It was steady, faint, and too low to be a porch light. I stood there watching it for a minute. Maybe someone was camping illegally? Or a ranger set up a backwoods station. I debated calling out, but something held me back, a weird, gut-level instinct. Instead, I stepped off the road and walked toward it. The brush was dense, and the light bobbed as if it were moving, like someone holding it. I stopped when I reached a narrow, overgrown trail I hadn't noticed before. The light had vanished. Completely. One moment it was there between the trees, the next it was swallowed by the forest. No footsteps. No rustling. I backed up slowly. Right then, I heard the unmistakable snap of a twig directly behind me. I spun around, but nothing was there. Not a squirrel. Not a deer. Just trees and mist. And then I saw it. Not a person, but something. Someone standing about 20 feet back on the road. A man. Maybe. Tall. Still. Wearing what looked like a park ranger's uniform. But something was wrong with the way he stood. His posture was too stiff, and his head tilted just a little too far to the side, like a mannequin on a crooked shelf. "Hey!" I called out. My car broke down. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stood there. I walked toward him, more annoyed than scared at that point. But as I got closer, maybe 10 feet away, I saw his eyes. Glassy. Like marbles. No reaction, no focus. Just wide and unblinking. His name badge was rusted over, unreadable. His uniform looked old. Like decades old. Stained and sun-faded. Before I could say another word, he turned and walked into the woods. No flashlight. No hesitation. Straight into the thicket, like it wasn't even there. I didn't follow him. Instead, I ran back to my car. But when I got back to where I'd left it, it was gone. No car. No tire marks. No sign I had ever pulled over. Just empty pavement and more mist than before. I started to hyperventilate. Had I taken a wrong turn on the walk back? No, I recognized that gnarled tree near the ditch. This was where I left the car. But it was just not there. I started shouting, hoping someone would hear me. No one did. Then I heard the crunching again. Footsteps on gravel. Behind me. I turned, no one. But now the forest didn't feel empty. It felt like it was watching me. Like it had always been watching me. That's when I noticed something else. The road behind me had changed. Literally. There was no bend. No slope. The entire stretch I had walked earlier was now a dead straight shot. No curves, no familiar landmarks. As if the mountain had reshaped itself when I wasn't looking. I sat down on the road. Just sat there. I didn't know what else to do. And then in the distance I saw headlights. Relief hit me like a truck, no pun intended. A set of dim headlights was approaching from the bend that shouldn't have existed. I scrambled to my feet, waving both arms. The car slowed to a crawl as it got close. It was an old pickup, rusted blue with one busted headlight. The driver rolled down his window. He was maybe in his 60s, heavy-set with sun-spotted skin and a trucker's hat. "You all right?" he asked, squinting. I explained everything in a rush, my car dying, the weird man, the missing vehicle. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly. "You got turned around," he said finally. "Happens more than you'd think up here." I climbed into the passenger seat, thankful for warmth and company. As we drove, I looked back at the woods. Everything looked normal now. Birds chirped. A breeze stirred the branches. The mist had cleared. The man didn't speak much as he drove. After a while, I asked if he knew anything about a ranger station or someone who might have been out there. He stared ahead and said, "Used to be a ranger, lived up here back in the 60s. Disappeared during a winter storm. Folks said he went looking for a hiker who never checked back in. Neither of them was ever found." I didn't respond. We pulled into a gas station, maybe 30 minutes later. I turned to thank the man, but he was gone. I mean it. The truck was parked, engine off, but the driver's side door was still closed. He wasn't in the seat. He hadn't gotten out. I hadn't heard a thing. I stumbled inside the gas station, completely shaken. The cashier asked if I needed help. I asked him about the truck parked outside. He looked through the window, confused. "That thing's been sittin' there since noon," he said. "Ain't nobody drove it for hours." I stayed at a motel that night, not wanting to be anywhere near the park. The next morning, a tow truck company finally located my rental car. It was parked on the side of Highway 441, exactly where I'd left it. Except the engine worked fine. It started on the first try. There were no signs it had been moved. No damage. Nothing. I checked the mileage. It hadn't gone anywhere. Not a single mile added. But here's the part one can't explain. On the passenger seat, there was a rusted park ranger badge. No name. Just the words U.S. Park Service stamped into it. Cold to the touch. Covered in dried mud. I turned it in to the rental office. They couldn't trace it. Said it wasn't one of theirs. I've Googled every combination of missing ranger cases in the Smokies, and a few of them match, down to the year and storm story. But none of those badges have ever been recovered. To this day, I don't know if I was saved or warned. All I know is I'll never drive that road alone again. Not after dark. Not in the Smokies. Not ever. It was early May when I decided to take a detour through the Blue Ridge region on my way from Charlotte, North Carolina to Charleston, West Virginia. I'd read about the scenic backroads that crisscross the Appalachian foothills and thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to clear my head. I'd just quit my job, gone through a breakup, and wanted a solo drive where I could let the silence settle in. I was using a paper map, not out of nostalgia, but because there wasn't a bar of signal anywhere in those valleys. The plan was to get back to the main highway by nightfall. The road I took wasn't even paved for most of it. It narrowed the deeper I went, with thick forest leaning in on both sides, like it wanted to swallow the path whole. The kind of road where you don't expect to pass another car for hours. My phone had already lost signal miles ago, and I hadn't seen a house or a fence since turning off the highway. I wasn't worried, though, until the steering got heavy and the car jolted hard to the right. I pulled over and discovered the front passenger tire had blown out. No warning, no puncture I could see. It just looked shredded, like something had ripped through it. I cursed under my breath, threw the hazard lights on, and opened the trunk to get the spare. That's when I realized the spare was flat, too. I kicked myself. I'd meant to get it checked months ago and never did. The sun was still out, but not by much. The woods were already casting long shadows across the road. I figured I'd walk back the way I came, maybe find a house, a gas station, anything. About half an hour into walking, I saw something that gave me hope. A mailbox half hidden in overgrown brush on the left side of the road. The name on it had faded, and the post was leaning like it was on its last leg. There was a narrow dirt driveway behind it, curling into the woods. I followed it without thinking much. Anything was better than standing on the road all night. The path was longer than I expected. Maybe half a mile in, I started seeing old car parts scattered in the weeds, axles, rusted hubcaps, torn seat cushions. It felt less like a junkyard and more like a trail of wreckage. Still, I kept going. Finally, I saw a cabin. Not a cute log cabin like something you'd rent for a weekend, but a rundown structure with warped siding and blacked-out windows. There was a shed out back, and what looked like chicken wire stretched between trees in odd directions like makeshift fencing. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder. The air felt heavier, like the forest had gone silent just for me. Just as I turned to leave, I heard movement inside. Slow, deliberate steps. Then nothing. I called out, said my car had broken down, and I just needed help. The door creaked open maybe 3 inches. Just enough for me to see part of a face, an old woman's, I think. White wispy hair, skin like worn leather, one eye that never blinked. She didn't speak, just looked at me, then shut the door again. I stood there, stunned. I didn't know whether to knock again, or take that as a sign to get the hell out. But then I heard something behind the shed, a metallic clang, like a shovel dropped on cement. I stepped back, trying to peer around the house. More sounds came, footsteps, heavier this time, and voices. Low. Male. One of them laughed, not in a friendly way. It was sharp and mocking, like whoever it was had been watching me this whole time. I panicked. I backed away, turned, and started walking quickly down the dirt path, back toward the road. I wasn't running, not yet, but my heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I kept hearing twigs snap behind me, soft rustling through the trees, like someone keeping pace but never close enough to see. When I finally got back to the road, I looked both ways and saw nothing but empty woods. That's when I noticed something strange about my car. It was gone. The hazard lights had stopped blinking, and the car, the whole damn thing, was just not there anymore. I stood frozen. I was 100% sure I had left it right on the edge of the road, half on gravel. Now there wasn't even a tread mark. No broken glass. Just empty space. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't retrace my steps because wherever that car had gone, I hadn't taken it there. I kept walking, heading deeper up the road in the direction I was originally traveling, just hoping I'd find something. About a mile later, I saw a narrow wooden bridge crossing over a dried creek bed. Just past it was another dirt path, no sign, no mailbox. But parked halfway up the path was a dark-colored SUV. It looked out of place. Clean. New. Too new. I considered running toward it, but something about the way it was parked made my stomach turn. The doors were open. All of them. like someone had just abandoned it mid-drive. I crept closer and saw the driver's side door hanging open, the interior light on. The engine was off, but the keys were still in the ignition. And then I saw the footprints, in the dirt, in front of the SUV. Barefoot. 2 sets, maybe 3, leading away from the car and into the trees. No sign of a struggle, no blood, nothing broken. I didn't follow them. I backed away slowly and turned around, only to see a man standing in the middle of the road. He wasn't there seconds ago. He had no flashlight, no car, no sound announcing his arrival. Just standing there, hands by his sides, watching me. He looked mid-30s. Dirty jeans, camo jacket. Mud-caked boots. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but his face didn't show anything. No anger, no confusion, no smile. Just blank. I called out, asking if he was the driver of the SUV. He didn't answer. He didn't move. I took a step back. That's when he raised one hand and pointed behind me, toward the woods where the footprints had gone. I froze. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, behind him, I saw 2 more figures step out of the treeline, one on each side of the road. Both dressed like him. One was holding something long, a pipe or a crowbar. I ran. Full sprint. I didn't look back. I didn't try to be quiet. I just ran until my chest burned and my legs threatened to give out. I don't know how far I went, maybe 2-3 miles, but I finally saw headlights in the distance. A truck. A real running truck. I darted into the road, waving both arms like a lunatic. The truck skidded to a stop. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and wide eyes, rolled down his window and yelled, "You all right?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed behind me and said, "They're following me." He didn't ask questions. He just unlocked the door and told me to get in. We drove for what felt like forever. He tried calling the sheriff's office, but the signal was garbage until we hit the edge of town. Eventually, a deputy met us at a gas station. I told them everything, or tried to. I could tell they didn't believe most of it. No one had reported a missing SUV. No recent cases of people disappearing from the area. No cabin where I described it. The road I claimed to be on had been closed for construction for over a year. They drove me back the next morning. My car was there, exactly where I'd left it. Tires still flat. Spare still flat. But no footprints. No SUV. No dirt trail. Just road and trees and silence. Before I left, one of the deputies said something I'll never forget. He pulled me aside and muttered, "You're lucky. Most folks who break down up there, they don't make it back." I've never driven through that region again. Never tried to make sense of what happened. But every now and then, I check missing persons bulletins from that area. A surprising number of them vanish without a trace. No accident. No remains. Just gone. And whenever I drive anywhere remote now, I bring 2 spare tires, a flare gun, and a satellite phone. Because I know what's out there, and it's not a ghost story. It's worse. This happened in early September, right after the first cold snap of the season. I'm a long-haul courier for a private contractor, the kind that picks up odd jobs, medical equipment, sensitive documents, custom freight. That day, I was hauling sealed lab samples from Knoxville to a research facility near Hazard, Kentucky. The route usually takes about 4 hours, but I got a call saying the lab was closing early due to a power issue. If I didn't get there by 4 p.m., I'd have to wait till morning. That wasn't an option. The samples were time-sensitive, packed in dry ice. About halfway in, I stopped in a little gas station just outside Pineville. While filling up, I asked the old guy behind the counter if there was any way to shave off some time. He looked at my van and then out the window and said, "There's a road cuts through the hills behind Dry Creek. Old mining camp back there, been shut since the 80s. Locals avoid it, but it's passable." He gave me directions, vague ones, and told me not to stop for anything once I passed the main gate. I figured he was just being dramatic. I should have listened. The first 10 minutes on the gravel road were fine. It was narrow and winding, but nothing worse than I'd seen before. Trees pressed in close, blocking most of the sun, and the incline was steep in parts. No signs, no houses, just forest and the occasional rusted-out piece of equipment tossed off to the side. Eventually, the road dipped into a wide clearing. That's when I saw the remains of the mining camp. It didn't look like much at first, just a row of leaning wooden buildings and a couple of trailers that had collapsed into themselves. Graffiti was scrawled across every surface. Windows shattered, metal roof panels torn off and curled like they'd been peeled by giant hands. There were faded signs that read Dalmare number 6 and no entry without permit. A few crumbling brick structures stood on the far side, probably old maintenance sheds or mess halls. Everything was dead quiet, except for a soft creaking sound, metal swinging gently in the wind. I slowed down out of curiosity, rolled the window down, and took a few photos on my phone. That was mistake number 1. As I eased the van forward, I passed what looked like an old security station, just a small shack with a busted stop arm and broken radio equipment. Past that point, the air changed. I don't mean the temperature. It was like the air itself got thicker, heavier. The way it does before a thunderstorm. But the sky above was clear. I kept telling myself I was being dramatic. Then I saw a figure. Just up ahead, on the left side of the road, standing behind a pile of rusted oil drums. At first, I thought it was a mannequin. Just still. Too still. Then I realized it was a man in a hard hat and old mining coveralls, faded navy blue. His face was pale and blank, not like he was staring at me but past me. I slowed the van to a crawl and waved out the window. He didn't move. I rolled past him, keeping an eye on the side mirror. He was gone. I slammed the brakes, put it in reverse, and backed up fast. But when I got to the spot, nothing. No drums. No figure. Just empty space. That's when I noticed the van's clock was wrong. It read 3:37, but I had checked it 10 minutes ago, and it had said 3:02. I hadn't been driving for 35 minutes in that place. No way. I grabbed my phone. It was off. Dead battery. And when I turned the ignition off and back on, the radio didn't come on either. The entire console was frozen. I kept going. I just wanted out. The road got worse. Potholes. Overgrowth. At one point, I had to steer around an old mining cart that had derailed and rolled halfway across the path. And then, without warning, I drove into what looked like the heart of the old camp, a sunken gravel pit, surrounded by dilapidated dorm-style buildings. And scattered across the ground were personal items, boots, rusted toolboxes, hard hats. Not abandoned equipment, personal belongings. Like people had left in a hurry and never came back. I parked and stepped out, drawn in by something I can't explain. One of the dorm buildings had its door ajar. A red thermos sat just inside the doorway on a cinder block. There were scuff marks on the floor, and dust, thick dust, except for a single set of tracks leading down the hallway. I should have left right then, but I followed the tracks. The hallway was dark and narrow, lined with bunk rooms on both sides. Each door was numbered, room 1, room 2, room 3. Most were open, revealing small metal cots and overturned furniture. But room 7 was closed, and the tracks ended there. I stood outside it, holding my breath. Then I reached out and turned the handle. It opened with a sharp creak. Inside, the room was perfectly clean. Not dusty. No debris. The bed was made. A lunchbox sat on the desk, lid half open. And sitting in the corner of the room was the same man I'd seen earlier. Same hard hat. Same coveralls. Except this time, his head was down, his hands folded in his lap. I froze. Then he raised his head. His eyes didn't look real. Not like glass eyes or anything, they just didn't move. And his mouth started to open. But what came out wasn't speech. It was the sound of coal being shoveled, scraping metal and rock tumbling. The room grew darker, not from shadows, but like the air itself dimmed. My chest got tight. I backed out slowly and sprinted back to the van. I didn't care about the road anymore. I drove straight back the way I came, even though I knew that meant hours added to the trip. I didn't stop. I didn't look in the mirror. It wasn't until I hit paved road again that my phone powered back on. The time? 3:08 p.m. I made it to the lab before they closed. Barely. The guy who signed off on the delivery gave me a weird look and asked if I was all right. I told him I'd gotten turned around near an old camp. He paused, then asked, "Was it Dalmare?" I nodded. He didn't say anything else. Just signed the sheet and closed the door. Back at my hotel that night, I looked it up. Dalmare No. 6 had been a strip mining operation back in the 70s and early 80s. A methane explosion in '83 killed 14 workers in the South Shaft. The company sealed off the site within months and left everything behind. The bodies of 3 workers were never recovered. No one had been allowed to build there since. What I still can't explain is the photos I took when I first saw the camp. When I finally opened my camera roll, they were gone. All of them. Replaced by a single image I never took, a grainy shot of the inside of a bunk room. Room 7. Bed made. Thermos on the desk. And in the corner, barely visible in the low light, was a man in a hard hat. He wasn't sitting. He was standing. Closer than I remembered. Right by the door.